how ancient Polynesians became the world's greatest navigators, crossing impossible distances with nothing but the stars, the waves, and generations of carefully memorized knowledge.
The Polynesian people are some of the most amazing tribes on Earth. Surrounded by water, these people were able to connect distant islands. It's even more intriguing how they did it, without modern tools, guided only by the stars above them, the movement of the waves.
That's amazing. It's really sophisticated. So how does this canoe construction technique connect with the Polynesians?
This was the standard technique for making boats among Polynesians. And I have an example right here.
And a deep understanding of the sea that almost feels superhuman, from Hawaii to New Zealand, and from Easter Island to Fiji. And just recently, scientists have discovered something in ancient DNA that made them this good. Join us in this video as we take you through the full story. What ancient DNA revealed about the Polynesians. Recent archaeological discoveries are continuing to reshape the story of Polynesian migration. Excavations in New Zealand suggest that the arrival of the Maori people may have happened earlier than researchers once believed. At the same time, improved dating methods applied to ancient sites in Hawaii are revealing that people may have lived there longer than previously estimated. But some of the most fascinating clues come from genetics. When scientists look at DNA, especially the parts passed down through families, they can trace the movements of entire populations with remarkable accuracy. Let's start with maternal DNA, which is passed from mother to child through mitochondrial DNA. Nearly all Polynesian people carry a specific mitochondrial haplogroup known as B4A1A1A, the Polynesian motif. This genetic signature is incredibly common in Polynesia. On some remote islands, it appears in nearly the entire population, meaning almost everyone shares this maternal ancestry. When scientists traced this lineage back through time, they discovered it originated in Taiwan and parts of island Southeast Asia. As early Austronesian language family voyagers moved eastward across the Pacific Ocean, this genetic line accumulated small mutations, tiny markers that help scientists track the path of their migration from island to island. The paternal side of the story, DNA passed from father to son through the Y chromosome, is even more complex. Polynesian men carry a mixture of several Y chromosome haplogroups. Some of these, such as O3A2C Y chromosome haplogroup, connect directly to the Amias people, an indigenous group from Taiwan. This provides one of the strongest genetic links between Polynesian populations and their ancestral homeland in Asia. Other paternal lineages, such as haplogroup C2 and haplogroup C2A, point clearly to populations in Melanesia. This supports the idea that Polynesian ancestors mixed with local populations while migrating through regions like Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. One of the most surprising discoveries came in 2016. Researchers were able to extract ancient DNA from skeletons belonging to the Lapita culture, found in Vanuatu and Tonga. These individuals lived about 3,000 years ago. The results were astonishing. The earliest settlers in the Pacific showed almost no Papuan ancestry at all. Genetically, they were overwhelmingly East Asian. This suggests that the Melanesian genetic component seen in modern Polynesian populations was added later, after the first Lapita settlers had already spread through the Pacific. Over time, further interaction and mixing with Papuan populations introduced those genetic markers into the Polynesian population. The DNA evidence makes one thing clear: this wasn't a single migration. Instead, it was a layered journey, almost like a story written in two chapters. The first chapter begins with voyagers from Asia. The second unfolds as these explorers mixed with Melanesian populations, creating the unique genetic identity that Polynesian peoples carry today. And the scale of their achievement is hard to overstate. The Pacific Ocean covers nearly 1/3 of the Earth's surface. Across that enormous expanse, Polynesian navigators managed to locate tiny islands, places many once believed were impossible to find without modern tools. Yet, they succeeded. They succeeded because of deep environmental knowledge, remarkable skill, and an extraordinary willingness to sail beyond the horizon into the unknown. In a world that often feels small and fully mapped, The story of Polynesian origins reminds us of something powerful. Ancient people accomplished feats we are only beginning to fully understand. The navigators of Polynesia looked at the largest ocean on Earth and didn't see a barrier. They saw an opportunity. To them, the Pacific Ocean wasn't an empty void. It was a vast highway connecting islands, cultures, and new homes waiting to be discovered. How did their story begin? Who really are the Polynesians? Keep watching to find out. The most intriguing voyage story. At its heart, this is a story about courage, intelligence, and the determination to pursue what must have seemed like an impossible dream. But the story of the Polynesian people doesn't actually begin in the Pacific. Instead, it starts thousands of miles away, in a place most people would never expect, Taiwan. Yes, Taiwan. Around 5,000 years ago, the ancestors of the people who would eventually settle Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand began their journey from the shores of what is now Taiwan. Researchers know this because of a fascinating combination of evidence, linguistics, archaeology, and, more recently, DNA analysis. Together, they tell a story that reads almost like a detective mystery written into our genes. Researchers began to notice something unusual. Languages spoken across the Pacific, from Madagascar in the west to Easter Island in the east, seemed to be connected. Despite the massive distances between these places, the languages shared clear similarities. Linguists eventually grouped them into one large family called the Austronesian language family, one of the largest language families in the world, with more than 1,200 languages. When researchers traced these languages back through time, almost like following breadcrumbs, they kept arriving at the same place, Taiwan and parts of southern China. Even today, some of the words used in Hawaii for things like canoes, sails, and the ocean share deep linguistic roots with the languages spoken by indigenous Taiwanese tribes. That isn't a coincidence. It's evidence of a cultural and linguistic connection that stretches back about 5,000 years. But the story becomes even more fascinating when scientists look at genetics. DNA research shows that Polynesian people carry genetic markers from two major ancestral groups. The first comes from East Asian populations, those early voyagers who likely set out from Taiwan. The second comes from Papuan populations in Melanesia. This discovery reveals something important. The migration wasn't a single, direct journey across the Pacific Ocean. Instead, it was a long, gradual movement that lasted centuries. Along the way, people settled on islands, interacted with local populations, and exchanged culture and knowledge. You can think of it like a relay race that lasted generations. Each island became a stopping point and a launching pad for the next voyage. Archaeology supports this story as well. Across the Pacific, scientists have found a distinctive kind of pottery known as Lapita culture pottery. It first appeared about 3,500 years ago in the Bismarck Archipelago, near Papua New Guinea. These pottery pieces are decorated with detailed geometric patterns pressed into the clay. For archaeologists, they act like ancient signposts marking the path of Polynesian ancestors. Wherever Lapita pottery appears, it signals that the early ancestors of Polynesian people once lived there. But this discovery leads to an even bigger question, one that puzzled researchers for decades. Why? Why would people leave a stable island home and sail into the unknown, across thousands of miles of open ocean? Imagine this for a moment. These were people who deliberately sailed toward islands they couldn't even see, across vast stretches of open ocean that would make many modern sailors nervous. To understand how incredible this was, let's look at the distances. The journey from Tahiti to Hawaii is about 2,400 miles across the open ocean. That's roughly the same distance as traveling from New York City to Los Angeles, except there's no land in between, just endless water, open sky, and a deep trust in their knowledge of the sea. Then there's Easter Island. The nearest inhabited island is more than 1,200 miles away. In fact, this island is often described as the most remote inhabited place on Earth. And yet, Polynesian voyagers reached it. So, how'd they do it? How were they able to cross these vast distances to build new cities? Keep watching to find out. The Polynesian science. What you never knew about ocean navigation. They made these journeys in large double-hulled canoes, carrying everything needed to start a new life. People, plants, animals, seeds, fresh water, and food that would last weeks at sea. The expansion didn't happen all at once. It unfolded gradually, generation after generation, with each wave of explorers pushing farther into the unknown. Around 3,500 years ago, the ancestors of the Polynesians, known at this stage as the Lapita culture people, began moving through Melanesia. They eventually settled on islands like Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. These islands became a kind of cultural birthplace. It was here that the distinct Polynesian culture we recognize today began to take shape. Then something curious happened. For nearly 1,000 years, the expansion seemed to pause. Archaeologists refer to this period as the Long Pause, a time when no new distant islands appear to have been settled. But this pause didn't mean inactivity. Instead, something remarkable was happening. During this time, Polynesian navigators were refining their ocean-going technology and perfecting their navigation skills. And when they were ready, the expansion began again, this time at an astonishing pace. Around 1,500 years ago, Polynesian voyagers spread outward across the Pacific Ocean in multiple directions. They sailed east to the Society Islands and later to the Marquesas Islands. From there, they continued north to Hawaii, about 1,200 years ago, south to New Zealand, known to the Maori as Aotearoa, around 1,000 years ago, and eventually east to Easter Island, called Rapa Nui by its inhabitants. Every one of these voyages was a calculated risk, a bold decision to sail beyond the horizon, believing that land must exist somewhere out there. And modern research has revealed something important. These journeys weren't accidents. They were carefully planned expeditions. How do we know? Because the voyagers didn't arrive empty-handed. They brought their world with them. Polynesian navigators had an extraordinary understanding of the natural world. At night, they relied on the stars. By knowing which stars rose and set at certain points on the horizon and how those patterns changed throughout the year, a skilled navigator could hold a steady course across thousands of miles of the Pacific Ocean. But the stars only help when the sky is clear, and they're only visible at night. So what happened during the day, or when clouds covered the sky? This is where Polynesian navigation becomes truly remarkable. Navigators didn't just read the sky, they read the ocean itself. Experienced wayfinders could sense the presence of land from more than 100 miles away by studying how ocean swells behaved. When deep ocean waves encounter an island, they bounce back and create subtle patterns in the water. A trained navigator could actually feel these changes through the hull of a canoe. From those patterns, they could tell not only that land was nearby, but also the direction in which it lay. Birds were another important clue. Certain seabirds travel only a limited distance from land. For example, if a navigator spotted a tern flying straight in one direction late in the afternoon, it was often a good sign to follow it. The bird was likely heading back to its nesting place on land. Clouds also revealed valuable hints. Cloud formations behave differently over land than over open ocean. Sometimes the underside of a cloud would take on a faint green tint, a sign that a lagoon below was reflecting light upward. Other times, a single cloud might remain almost perfectly still, while others moved across the sky. That often meant the cloud was sitting above an island. How far did these navigation techniques sustain the Polynesians? At what point was evolution necessary to achieve the larger feats? Let's find out. Proof that the Polynesians weren't myths. Even the ocean water itself offered clues. Changes in salinity, temperature, or the appearance of certain seaweeds could suggest that land was nearby. Skilled navigators paid attention to every detail. The stars, the waves, birds, clouds, and even the taste and color of the water. All of this information was woven together into an incredibly complex mental map of the ocean. For centuries, much of this knowledge existed only in oral tradition. Many outsiders doubted that such navigation techniques could truly guide long-distance voyages. Then, in 1975, something extraordinary happened. A traditional double-hulled voyaging canoe called Hokulea was launched in Hawaii. The mission was bold: sail from Hawaii to Tahiti, a journey of about 2,400 miles across open ocean, using only traditional Polynesian navigation methods. No GPS, no compass, no sextant, just the stars, the waves, and the ancient knowledge passed down through generations. The navigator for this historic voyage was Mau Piailug, a legendary master wayfinder from the tiny island of Satawal in Micronesia. On his island, the ancient art of traditional navigation had survived while it had faded in many other parts of the Pacific. On May 1, 1976, the traditional voyaging canoe Hokulea set sail from Hawaii. 33 days later, it arrived safely in Tahiti, guided entirely by traditional Polynesian wayfinding. The success of that journey was groundbreaking. It proved something historians had debated for years. Polynesian ancestors did not accidentally drift across the Pacific Ocean. They sailed there intentionally, using highly advanced navigation knowledge that could rival modern instruments. But even after that breakthrough, new discoveries continued to reshape what we know about Polynesian history. In 2020, a major genetic study revealed something astonishing about Polynesian contact with the Americas. DNA analysis of modern populations showed that Polynesians carry genetic markers linked to indigenous peoples of South America. Even more surprising, this genetic mixing appears to have occurred around the year 1200, centuries before Europeans ever arrived in the Pacific. This suggests that Polynesian voyagers likely reached the coast of South America, possibly near present-day Colombia or Ecuador. There they encountered indigenous communities. Some intermarriage likely occurred, and later voyages brought those Polynesians, or their descendants, back across the ocean to the Pacific Islands. Think about the scale of that achievement. A journey from Polynesia to South America and back could mean a round trip of nearly 10,000 miles across the open ocean. And the evidence doesn't stop with DNA. There's also the case of the sweet potato. This crop originated in South America, yet it was already being grown across Polynesia long before Europeans arrived. Even the language hints at this connection. The Polynesian word for sweet potato, kumara, is strikingly similar to words used for the same plant in several South American languages. This suggests more than a single accidental encounter. The exchange of plants and genetic markers points to repeated contact, multiple voyages, and interactions that may have taken place over generations. Meanwhile, archaeologists continue to uncover discoveries that push the dates of Polynesian settlement even further back in time. Each new finding adds another layer to this remarkable story of exploration, skill, and human curiosity. What other things make Polynesians an interesting island civilization? Keep watching to find out. The intriguing Polynesian culture. Polynesia is generally divided into two main cultural regions, West Polynesia and East Polynesia. Although they share common ancestry and traditions, each region developed distinct social structures and cultural adaptations. West Polynesian societies developed in areas that supported relatively larger populations and more stable settlements. Because of this, they built strong social institutions, including organized systems of marriage, law, trade, and economic exchange. This region includes island groups such as Tonga, Samoa, and nearby islands. From these islands, especially Samoa, early migration patterns began moving eastward. Explorers traveled from the Samoan Islands to the Tuvalu Atolls. These islands became important stepping stones that later enabled Polynesian navigators to reach remote Polynesian communities scattered across Melanesia and Micronesia. The societies of East Polynesia developed differently. Many of their islands were smaller and more isolated, which meant their cultures adapted to living on limited land and resources. This region includes islands such as Niue, the Cook Islands, Tahiti, the Tuamotu Archipelago, the Marquesas Islands, Hawaii, and Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui. The largest islands in New Zealand were settled later by Eastern Polynesian people. There, the Maori adapted their culture to a cooler, non-tropical environment, something quite different from the tropical islands most Polynesians were used to. Across much of Polynesia, leadership was typically determined by hereditary lineage, meaning chiefs were chosen based on their family bloodline. However, Samoa developed a more complex system known as the Fa'amatai system. This system blends hereditary rights with demonstrated leadership ability and community service. In other words, family lineage matters, but so do personal skills and contributions to society. When Europeans first arrived in Tahiti, researchers estimated that about 35,000 people lived there. Society was clearly stratified. High-status individuals had full access to land, food, and resources, while lower-status individuals had fewer privileges and limited access to those resources. Life on small islands required a wide range of advanced skills. Islanders depended on deep knowledge of religion and spiritual practices, farming and food cultivation, fishing and ocean resources, weather prediction, navigation across the ocean, and construction of outrigger canoes, similar in concept to modern catamarans. Because island survival depended on these abilities, navigators were among the most respected members of society. Many islands even maintained special navigation houses, where knowledge of wayfinding was taught and where canoes were built. Trade was important across Polynesia. Islanders exchanged both luxury goods and everyday items between communities. However, island life also brought serious challenges. Periodic droughts and food shortages sometimes led to conflict between groups. Low-lying islands were especially vulnerable to storms. When tropical cyclones pushed saltwater onto farmland, crops could be destroyed. When that happened, even fishing, the main source of protein, could not fully replace the lost food supply. Despite these challenges, Polynesian societies developed highly organized cultures that balanced survival, exploration, and community life across one of the largest ocean regions on Earth. Polynesian settlements came in two main types: hamlets and villages. Whether a hamlet or village was built usually depended on the size of the island. Larger volcanic islands often had hamlets, small clusters of 4 or 5 houses, usually with gardens, because the land could be divided into different zones. Food and resources were plentiful, and hamlets helped prevent overlap between zones. Villages, on the other hand, were found on smaller islands, especially along the coast. They could have 30 or more houses, and in the case of atolls, the village might sit on just one island while food was cultivated on the others. Many villages were fortified with walls or palisades made of stone and wood. Interestingly, New Zealand is an exception, where large volcanic islands also had fortified villages. Polynesians were not only skilled navigators, but also talented artists and craftsmen. Everyday objects, like fish hooks, were carefully made for specific types of fishing, and often decorated even when decoration had no practical purpose. Stone and wooden weapons were considered stronger and more powerful when well-crafted and decorated. In some islands, weaving was highly developed, and giving woven items as gifts was a cherished tradition. Even homes were built with care and skill, reflecting the character of the people who lived in them. Their body decoration and jewelry remain remarkable to this day. Polynesian religious beliefs were shared across the Pacific. Although their languages varied, they had similar stories about the creation of the earth and sky, the gods who governed life, and everyday religious practices. People would travel thousands of miles to take part in communal celebrations that were important to everyone. Starting in the 1820s, large numbers of missionaries arrived in the Polynesian islands, converting many communities to Christianity. According to Ian Breward, Polynesia has become one of the most strongly Christian regions in the world, and Christianity was quickly and successfully woven into Polynesian culture. Its arrival also coincided with the decline of war and slavery. How wealthy are the Polynesian people? How well do they conduct their economic lives, even today? Let's see. The challenges of being Polynesian. Economy. With the exception of New Zealand, most independent Polynesian islands rely heavily on foreign aid and remittances from relatives living abroad. Many communities encourage their young people to seek work elsewhere, so they can send money home. Tourism also plays a major role in some places, such as Easter Island. Others have more unusual income sources. Tuvalu, for example, earned revenue from marketing its internet domain TV, while the Cook Islands benefited from postage stamp sales. Hawaii, like New Zealand, depends heavily on tourism. It is one of the most visited parts of the Polynesian Triangle, welcoming over 10 million visitors annually, excluding 2020. Both Hawaii and New Zealand rely on tourism and outside financial support, which makes them vulnerable to global economic fluctuations. To address this, island governments are exploring ways to diversify their economies and reduce reliance on tourism. The first major attempt to unite the Polynesian islands came in the 1930s with Imperial Japan. Japanese theorists, led by Hachiro Arita, promoted the idea of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a cultural and economic bloc stretching from Southeast and Northeast Asia to Oceania, free from Western influence. Though it was presented as a pan-Asian movement aimed at independence from Western colonialism, in practice, it served Japan's expansionist ambitions. At its largest, the sphere reached from Japanese-occupied Indochina in the west to the Gilbert Islands in the east. Plans to extend it as far as Hawaii, Easter Island, and India never materialized, as Japan was defeated in World War II. In more recent history, Polynesian cooperation has taken a peaceful turn. After years of discussion, 3 sovereign states, Samoa, Tonga, and Tuvalu, along with 5 self-governing territories, launched the Polynesian Leaders Group in November 2011. This organization promotes collaboration on issues like culture, language, education, climate change, and trade. However, it is not a political or monetary union. Starting in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, Polynesians began migrating to New Zealand in waves, traveling by canoe. They settled across the North and South Islands, as well as the Chatham Islands. Over the centuries, these settlers developed distinct cultures. Those on the mainland became known as the Maori, while the settlers of the Chatham Islands became the Moriori people. European contact began in the 17th century, but it was in the 19th century that European settlement, led by newcomers known as Pakeha, dramatically changed Maori society. On October 28, 1835, a group of Maori chiefs issued a Declaration of Independence, drafted by Scottish businessman James Busby, forming the United Tribes of New Zealand. This move aimed to protect Maori trade and resist French colonization, and it was recognized by the British Crown in 1836. In 1840, Royal Navy officer William Hobson and several Maori chiefs signed the Treaty of Waitangi. This treaty made New Zealand a British colony and granted Maori the status of British subjects. However, disputes over land and settler expansion soon escalated into the New Zealand Wars, during which the colonial government confiscated Maori land. The combination of war and introduced diseases severely reduced the Maori population and disrupted their society. During the 20th and 21st centuries, the Maori population began to recover. Efforts were made to address historical injustices and improve social, economic, and political conditions. Starting in the 1960s, protest movements emerged to seek redress for past grievances. By the 2013 New Zealand census, roughly 600,000 people identified as Maori. How's the New Zealand economy today? How are they different from the average Polynesian? Keep watching to find out. New Zealand versus Polynesia. New Zealand has a modern, advanced economy. In 2022, it ranked 16th on the Human Development Index and 4th on the Index of Economic Freedom. It's considered a high-income country, with a 2023 nominal GDP per person of $48,071 US. The currency is the New Zealand dollar, often called the Kiwi dollar, which is also used in the Cook Islands, Niue, Tokelau, and the Pitcairn Islands. Historically, New Zealand's economy relied heavily on extractive industries, including sealing, whaling, flax, gold, kauri gum, and native timber. A major turning point came in 1882 when the first shipment of refrigerated meat was sent on the Dunedin to Britain, paving the way for a strong meat and dairy export trade. High demand from the UK and the US helped New Zealanders enjoy higher living standards than people in Australia and Western Europe during the 1950s and 1960s. However, things changed in 1973 when the UK joined the European Economic Community, shrinking New Zealand's export market. This, combined with the 1973 oil crisis and the 1979 energy crisis, triggered a deep economic depression. By 1982, New Zealand had the lowest per capita income among developed nations. In response, the government deregulated agriculture in the mid-1980s, phasing out subsidies over 3 years. Since 1984, successive governments implemented major economic reforms, first known as Rogernomics, later Euthanasia, transforming New Zealand from a highly regulated protectionist economy into a liberalized, free trade one. For reference, New Zealand produced 12 tons of gold in 2015. Unemployment in New Zealand hit a peak of just over 10% in 1991 and 1992, following the 1987 stock market crash. It gradually improved, reaching 3.7% in 2007, which ranked third among 27 comparable OECD countries. However, the 2008 global financial crisis hit hard. The economy shrank for 5 consecutive quarters, the longest recession in over 30 years, and unemployment rose again to 7% by late 2009. The lowest unemployment rate on record under the current methodology was 3.2% in December 2021, during the COVID-19 pandemic. While overall unemployment trends are similar across age groups, young people consistently face higher rates. For instance, in the September 2021 quarter, the general unemployment rate was 3.2%, but for youth aged 15 to 24, it was 9.2%. Since the 1970s, New Zealand has experienced several brain drains, with nearly a quarter of highly skilled workers living abroad, mostly in Australia and the UK, the highest proportion of any developed nation. More recently, a brain gain has brought in educated professionals from Europe and developing countries, helping to offset some of the losses. Today, New Zealand's economy benefits from a strong culture of innovation and skilled expertise. Poverty in New Zealand is closely tied to growing income inequality. Wealth is highly concentrated. The top 1% of the population owns 16% of the country's wealth, and the richest 5% hold 38%. By contrast, half of all New Zealanders, including pensioners and those relying on government support, live on less than $24,000 a year. Child poverty is a particularly pressing issue. As of June 2022, 12% of New Zealand children lived in low-income households, earning less than half of the median household income. What do you think about the recent revelations scientists have made using ancient Polynesian DNA? Have you ever experienced wayfinding? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us as we examine the Polynesian story, proof that they were brave, and the stories their DNA tells. We hope you found this video both insightful and interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more interesting discoveries. See you there.